You're listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike D. Giovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets. Welcome to what I believe will be episode 7. I don't know, maybe it's 8. We're going to get excited and throw a party when we get to 10, because I think that's the next cutoff for where they stop. So in the interest of my resilience, I'm just going to keep doing it. And sometimes I got to record them where I got to record them. For those of you that just do the listen, you won't notice. This will sound just like all the rest of them to you. But I'm sitting in my car, my Tesla, charging my car, and I've got a bit of time for my car to be fully charged. And so I'm going to record this podcast while I'm doing that. Multitask. Let's make the most out of it. I don't believe in multitasking, but this is a different kind of multitasking. I have to be sitting here with my car for the next 25 minutes. So I'm going to record an episode, and this week we're going to talk about purchasing in the home building industry. I can do a whole series on this, so this one's going to be high level. And probably what'll happen is I'll come back and listen to this, and there'll be like a half a dozen deep dive topics that we can go into from this. And so what I wanted to start is I was sitting here in my Tesla, charging my Tesla. I realized that, having a Tesla, there's some inconveniences. Charging for one, right? There's enough stations. It was a lot harder to own a Tesla like 5 years ago. But it's come a long way, but there's some inconveniences, right? And I got a Tesla because I drive a lot for work. And to be quite honest, I thought it would be nice to have like the self-driving and the help out with that, because I commute a fair amount. And that was why I bought it. And I wasn't sure how the charging would be, but look, with everything new, there are some inconveniences. And I tell people this all the time when in home building, just like with software, you go from one car to the next. My last car wasn't very comfortable. The cruise control wasn't the best. And so I switched cars. Now I've got some other things that I have to deal with, and that's the charging dance, that we call it. But when you switch software, same thing. You have a purchasing software or a full-on ERP system. Certain things work and certain things don't. You focus on the things that don't. And so you get something new, and people forget to focus on the things that they liked about the last software, and they assume that the new software they get is going to fix the bad things and not have any other bad things. And a lot of times what happens is there are things about the previous software that you didn't realize you liked, because we tend to focus on the things that we don't like. And so that's what leads me to high level talk about purchasing today for home builders, is that purchasing isn't causing all of your problems, and purchasing can't and won't solve all of your problems. So what do I mean by that? Like, a lot of times I've been hired, I think I've shared with everybody, I've worked for 5 builders in 3 different markets over the course of my 20-year career in home building. In some fashion of purchasing operations, but mostly purchasing. I came from a supply chain background prior to getting into home building, and in that time I worked for 3 public builders, 2 private builders. I've worked for 1 builder in the North Florida market. I've worked for 2 builders in the Colorado market. And I've worked for 3 builders in the Southern California market, and I did a couple years regionally supporting the Western United States. And, in that time, I got reasonably good at figuring out how to improve and get purchasing teams like running smooth and humming. And so typically, as I said, purchasing is not causing all of your problems, and it's not going to solve all of your problems. But I find that a lot of home builders that I talk to, even ones that I've worked for and other ones, and some of the folks that I know who support in other capacities the home building industry, I have it on good accord from my experience of people that I've spoken to that many builders think that their purchasing department isn't as good as it should be in varying degrees of that, let's say. And so, and I'm not saying that the places that I've gone and worked in my personal experience where they felt like the purchasing department needed to improve, I'm not saying they didn't need to improve and they weren't part of the problem, but they weren't the only problem in all of those instances. And so I want to talk about purchasing from the aspect of when people come to me and ask me if somebody is going to be good at purchasing, or do I feel this person has the ability to lead a purchasing department? What I first ask them is like, what are your expectations? Like, what are you trying to achieve? You think your purchasing department needs to be better, and you're trying to find that right leader, let's say, or fill in that gap, missing link person, and you're trying to solve all of these problems that you think you have that a lot of people feel center around around purchasing in the home building industry. And so when I get asked this, like, what does a good purchasing leader look like? The first thing I start with them is, well, what do you expect the leader of your purchasing team to do? Who is it, like, in terms of title? Is it a manager? Is it a director? Is it a VP? I've seen companies where they don't even have a purchasing manager. They've had 3 purchasing agents, maybe one's a senior. I've seen companies where they have a purchasing manager and that person reports to a VP of construction, or I've seen a purchasing director, they report to a VP of operations. I've seen purchasing directors report directly to DPs, and I've seen VPs of purchasing report to both VPs of operations and division presidents, and I've seen VPs of purchasing and sometimes directors report up through some sort of regional role. And why do I explain all those scenarios? Because when people come to me and say, like, hey, what do you think we need to do to fix our purchasing department, and we're looking for a person and we want to fill that role and get that right person, they often think that fixing their purchasing department is going to solve the most of their problems. And they also often think that hiring this one person or replacing that one person who's running it now is going to solve all the problems or all the issues in the purchasing department, or be like this magic wand. And that's not true. And I first ask the people I'm talking to, like, well, tell me what you expect them to do. Is this a manager? It's easy for me to tell you I think the difference is between a purchasing manager and a purchasing director. It's a little grayer and fuzzier when we want to talk about what's the difference between a purchasing director and a VP of purchasing, in my opinion. And I think if you read into the title, it should tell itself, but it gets a little funky at certain builders. They think different things. And so it's just like superintendent versus construction manager, right? Like, those two things have gone back and forth in different markets. California's, I think, a mix. We've got some superintendents and some construction managers, and ultimately they do the same thing. And when you look, though, at, let's say, a purchasing manager versus a purchasing director, this is the way I describe it. A purchasing manager is really just guiding, managing the resources, the team, to get the bids done in a timely fashion for the best cost possible. When you ask somebody to be a purchasing director, to me, I think it's a bigger difference managing a team and resources that exist. Things are kind of being given to them. They're an end user. They just take things and they process and they move forward. And I find a lot of people have that situation, and they want their purchasing team to function more like, a value add, more of a directing, strategy. And I tell these people, then you need a director. Well, what's the difference? So I say the manager manages resources and the director directs the department with the goals and initiatives of the division or company in mind. So they should be sitting at the leadership table, getting involved with, is this the right land deal to buy based on our strategy? Is that the right product design to execute on the cost that we're trying to achieve based on the strategy that we're going to go implement in that zip code where we bought that land? And I think the same for a VP. For me, they should be doing the same thing. I think the VP is, what's clear for me is once you're a VP, you should definitely be at that level. Some people can be in a director role, and because of either themselves, they're new to that role, or the company sort of looks at a director role more like a manager. And oftentimes the director title goes to a manager because it allows a higher pay, and they're trying to pull somebody along, or sometimes it happens. People get that role and maybe they're not even ready for it, but they're good at a manager. They're not ready for that next level, but they're about to leave. They get another offer. And so the way to keep them is get them into a director role. But ultimately, as you're running that division, whether you're a VP of operations or if you're the division president, whatever that may be, I highly encourage you, when you're thinking about getting your purchasing team running like a well-oiled machine, start thinking of that director role. Do you have it? Are they performing in that role? And are you letting them do that role as they should, coaching and guiding them to be more of that director to help you execute the strategy of the division rather than just processing plans and bids? And so purchasing, to me, as I said, it often gets viewed as it's the department that is the problem. Well, they touch everyone. They touch the vendors, they touch the plans and the product development, so forward planning. They touch construction because they're hiring these trades that have to execute on the schedule. And they touch sales because they're putting option programs together, they're on spec sheets. And so purchasing is often, in my opinion, and many departments in home building are hubs to other departments, but I've always felt, and from my experience watching it, purchasing is critical. So critical. And if you need proof of that, beyond the fact of all the departments that they impact, look at the percent of your direct costs that your purchasing team is in charge of as a percent of your revenue. And I will argue that in just about every market in the United States, it is the single largest portion of your revenue, even if you're running a well-oiled machine and you have some of the best costs in your marketplace. And I know in some of the Northeast and the West Coast, people are going to say, no, let you know, lots are. I'm going to caveat that now. I'm going to make sure, yes, a finished lot in some of those higher value markets is a bigger portion of your revenue. But if you're a production home builder, if you're buying finished lots, then this doesn't apply. But if you're buying land and then developing that land, putting the fees on top of it, the direct cost as a cost of goods sold percentage-wise is more than the land. It's more than the cost of the improvements of that land to get to that finished lot. It's more than your sales commissions. It's the single largest piece. So what I'm going to ask you, I need you to think about right out of the gate, why aren't you treating it that way if you're not? And so when you think your purchasing department isn't run right or it's not as good as it could be, take a personal look in the mirror, if you're in charge, and ask yourself, am I giving that department the due that it deserves, the resources that it deserves, the time that it deserves? And am I supporting them enough, looking at how important the function is? And so rather than letting them be the caboose of the train, which is what happens, they are the last line of defense for your costs. And so what happens is we buy land. We entitle land if we need to entitle it. We develop land. We are often over budget nowadays on all of those, or we're paying top dollar for land because it's very competitive. Understand that. You got to do what you got to do to keep things moving. We often pay more than we budgeted for the development of that land. It often takes longer than we need to. We often don't involve purchasing in the product development process. How do we put the architectural plans together? What structural engineer do we use? How do we put the soup together to make it pass the energy code? Are we getting good plans and good designs for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing? Are we letting purchasing weigh in on that? Are we letting them own it and drive it because we have a director and not just a manager, and we can teach and coach that person and hold them responsible for driving that process so that we can get the best product out and we can get it timely, but usually we're not. Many builders don't include purchasing and product development, or they're kind of ancillary to the process. I think they should drive the process because that's what they're buying, right? That single largest percentage of your revenue, of your cost of goods sold, is being controlled by the purchasing department, but it's from an input that how much control do they really have? Are you giving them the control they should have? Are you letting them be the project managers, the leaders of that? And so back to the caboose, they're typically not. I'd say it's the exception of the rule. They're not. You're seeing it more often now that they are very involved or driving the process. It often is not being handled, product development is that, in a timely fashion. It's not being thoughtful in terms of total end cost. It's often thought of like, what are our competitors doing? So let's do better than them. What does the city want? So let's do exactly what we think they want, plus a little bit, so we get through and get approved. Or maybe we did colored renderings in the entitlement and approval process before we even thought about the plans and the product or anything like that. And next thing you know, we've got gingerbread on all four sides, and we're building, a Chino-looking house in Beaumont or, Yucaipa. For those of you in Southern California, you'll get that reference. But I mean, it's sort of, the equivalent of like, we're building. I could go down the list of neighborhoods, but think about it. It's like, we end up over-speccing these homes both inside and outside. Are we involving the purchasing team in what goes in the home? And so they end up at the end of the day then getting these plans late after product developments. All this stuff is late. So we go to them and we say, hey, you know what? We know we're not giving you the resources you need. You don't have the team you need. You don't have the expectations are high. But we need you to cut your bid time in half. And we need to beat your budget by 5 or 10%. And I don't know about you, and if you disagree with me, I gave an extreme example. But if you believe that the general rule of thumb is that the purchasing team is involved and things stay on schedule, everybody else stays on budget, and when they get the plans, they're realistic to the budget that they're asked to meet. And then, were they involved in the budget? That's another good one. Were they involved in the budget that they have to now go meet? And so they're the caboose, because what happens at the end? We're running out of time and we're running out of money. And so we need purchasing to go save the day. And how do you think that's going to end? So once again, purchasing is not all of your problems, and they can't solve all of your problems. They need to be more involved. We need to hold them to a higher account. We need to train them to a higher level, but then we need to be respectful of what they need to get the job done that we want them to get done. Because if we don't, and they don't hit budget, what happens? If they get asked to make up the shortcomings of all the stuff that came before them, all the processes that came before them, all the budget busts that came before them, what are the chances that they're going to succeed? And when they don't succeed in that scenario, what happens to your margins? That's right, they suffer. And we're seeing this a lot right now out on the street. Builders are pushing hard for better costs because land prices are up, land development costs are up. The market's tight from an affordability aspect. We've got all kinds of things working against the margin of the builders, and they're hoping that their purchasing team can bail them out. And if you're in that boat, what I would say to you is, do you have the right setup, the right team, and the right processes to give yourself the best fighting chance? And are you planning and doing the right things to avoid that from happening like that again in the future? Curious to see your thoughts, and if you made it this far to the episode and you listen enough, I would love it if you would reach out and let me know if you have more thoughts on this. We're looking for guests. We're going to start having guests in a couple weeks, and I would love to have a deeper dive discussion on any one of the topics that I brought up in this one with anybody in the industry who'd like to talk about it. And with that, thank you again for listening. This is The Builder's Mindset with Mike D. Giovanni. I appreciate all of you, every single one, for your listening, and we will catch you next week. Have an amazing weekend. Thanks for listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike D. Giovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets. Remember, your mindset matters.